everyone, welcome back, or welcome for the first time if this is your very first class with Montblanc. I'm Brittany from Peak Paper Co., and I'm an artist here out in Western Canada in Edmonton, Alberta. I am so excited to be your modern calligraphy instructor today. It really appealed to me because there's actually very few rules in modern calligraphy, and it's very expressive. So I think of it kind of as an extension of your own personal style. I'm going to be using a couple of my favorite Montblanc writing instruments, my beautiful Around the World in 80 Days rollerball pen. And then, of course, I'm going to be showing my favorite writing instrument for calligraphy, which is the flexible nib. So the flexible nib is how we get those beautiful distinctions between thin and thick strokes. Okay, so let's get started here. So by definition, that's cursive writing. So cursive writing is the fast and fluid recording of information. That is not the case with calligraphy. So calligraphy is actually, you're going to feel like you're drawing instead of writing, okay? So it's a very slow art. So calligraphy, I want you to think of as drawing instead of writing. I want you to introduce our breathing exercise. So you're going to breathe in whenever we're moving in an upward motion, and breathe out whenever we're moving in a downward motion. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. And wow, what a difference. So let's do that again, moving in the opposite direction. So start with breathing out and breathe in, breathe out, and just keep moving in this motion. So this is actually still decades into my professional calligraphy practice, how I sit down at my desk to do any calligraphy work, because it really just gets me in that right mindset where speed is not of the essence, and I'm really just focused on the paper. So you might have noticed I'm using my flexible nib now. So anytime I was moving in a downward motion, I was applying a little bit of pressure to the nib, which opens up those tines and gave me a thicker stroke. So I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that in a few moments here, but just to kind of show you the difference between both. You absolutely don't need a flexible writing instrument today, but it definitely adds to that sensory experience. So to write in the copperplate style, and I'm actually going to show you an example of Chantel's script in a moment, just so you can see the difference. You have to follow a very specific set of rules. And this is the copperplate script. Absolutely stunning, kind of reminiscent of, those historical documents that you would think of from hundreds of years ago. Let's move on to the first page of our workbook here, which is the basic strokes. And I'm going to get our alphabet beside me so that I can kind of make reference to how this page is aligned with the page that you see on the right here. So even though it looks like all of these letters were written in one fluid motion, in calligraphy, as I just mentioned, they're actually created using a series of individual strokes. What I want to talk about now is that distinction between your thin and your thick lines. Anytime you see a thin line, that means that you are moving in an upward motion. Anytime you see a thick line, that means that you're moving in a downward motion. I'm going to start with the rollerball because I know that some of you watching today are not going to be using a flexible nib. And so I want to be able to show you this technique for how you kind of manually create those thicker strokes if you're using a rollerball. So you have your upstroke, your downstroke, overturn, underturn, oval, ascender loop, and descender loop. So let's do some upstrokes together using any writing instrument that you have at home. And we're just going to slowly move in an upward motion because it's thin on the up, thick on the down, right? Thin on the up, thick on the down. So because we're using a rollerball, obviously you can hold your writing instrument in any way that you'd like. And so we're just moving in a slow, controlled motion. And you're just looking for some consistency in your strokes. If you just had a coffee, that might make things a little bit more difficult, but don't worry. The goal is slow and controlled. If you were to do a downstroke with a rollerball pen, we have to manually thicken that downstroke because when you're doing modern calligraphy, it's thin on the up, thick on the down. But since we're using a rollerball, we're not automatically going to get that thicker stroke. See, I'm moving in a downward motion. It's the exact same look as my upstroke. So what I need to do is actually manually duplicate that downstroke. And the way that you do that is by creating a little box and filling it in. Now, if you have a fine or a medium nib in a fountain pen, it's actually even a lot easier to do the faux calligraphy technique because you're just simply going to drag that ink and fill in your downstroke manually. So my thin upstrokes are always going to be slow and controlled, moving in an upward motion, applying light pressure. But now, instead of having to manually duplicate that thicker stroke, I'm simply going to apply pressure and slowly move in a downward motion, applying pressure. And the goal is not to have the thinnest lines in the world next to the thickest. You just want to be able to tell the difference. We're going to start with a downstroke and transition into lighter pressure with an upstroke. So downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke. Similarly, you have your overturn, which is a light upstroke transitioning to a downstroke. Light upstroke transitioning to a downstroke. And that transition happens about a quarter of the way in for this overturn, and it happens about 3/4 of the way down with that underturn. So you want to start releasing pressure around here, and you want to start applying pressure right around here. And then you have your compound curve, which is a combination of both your overturn and your underturn. See how slow I'm moving? Upstroke, downstroke. Breathe in, right? Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in. With this oval shape here, we're actually going to start on the dotted line, and we're going to move upstroke, downstroke, upstroke. And don't worry if you're not able to perfectly connect those first and final strokes, because when you actually go to write letters and words, that is not important. What's important is your speed and understanding your upstrokes and your downstrokes to create each shape. So we'll move on to the next page of our workbook, which is how you combine those basic strokes, which didn't look like much, but are so important to master, how we combine those to create every letter of the alphabet. I've written kind of the alphabet and the letters below with the flexible nib so that you can visually see where you need to be moving in an upward motion and where you need to be moving in a downward motion to do that modern calligraphy script. Anytime you see a thin line, that means you're moving in an upward motion. Anytime you see a thick line, that means you're moving in a downward motion. I'm going to show you here with the flexible nib. We would create an oval shape and combine that with a downstroke underturn. And how that looks when you combine them is an oval, stop, downstroke, underturn. Similarly with the M, you start with that downstroke, you combine it with an overturn, stop, overturn, underturn. So that was 3 strokes to create one letter. So with this B here, we're going up, down, stop. So pay attention to the natural stopping points. So moving again up in that ascender loop, down, stop. And now again, going across, and this ending here is what's called the flourish. So that was 2 strokes to create the letter B. Letter C is a little bit easier. We're going to start with a little downstroke here. Watch how slow I'm moving. Down, up. And even if you are using a roller ball or a ballpoint pen today, really try to consciously be aware of your speed, because that's what's going to give you the greatest benefit in doing calligraphy. So the D was very similar to the B in that we started with the downstroke and then we're moving up, down, and flourish across. That flourish across is very reminiscent of that B and the uppercase B. So with this D, we could do this all in one fluid motion, or we could create that oval shape and then go up, apply pressure, underturn. So we're not going to write every single letter of the alphabet in this class today, because part 2, which is coming out in November, is an entire class dedicated to writing every letter of the alphabet. So I'm just going to focus on a few letters here that I think are, the most interesting or the most challenging when it comes to combining those individual strokes. And I'm going to point out the ones that are created in one single motion because they are so rare. And then lastly, a reminder about control. So you don't want to flick your wrists. When you end a stroke, I want you to end it as slowly and intentionally as when you start. I'm going to skip the first line because we just did that on the previous page. And I'm actually going to skip right to the letter H because this letter is actually created in one fluid motion. So we're going to start with a downstroke, upstroke, downstroke, upstroke, coming across, downstroke, underturn. So the letter S is also written in one fluid motion. So I'm getting in the proper positioning here. Again, angling my flexible nib. I'm going up with a thin stroke, down, applying pressure, and then coming across with that flourish at the end. Let's do the letter R together. So downstroke, stop, up, down, little flourish. So some of these flourishes that you see, like the top of the O here, what other flourish do I have? This W. Flourishes are a little bit different than your standard basic strokes. So moving on to our last lesson, connecting letters and writing words. So this is just to give you something to practice, and how you connect your letters is by extending what's called your exit strokes to connect with the next letter in your word. Instead of ending the letter A right here, I'm extending it all the way up as the first stroke of the B. The length of your exit strokes also actually determine your individual style. So you can see I have some consistency in the length of my exit strokes. If I was to write the word art with really long exit strokes, sorry, you couldn't see that for a moment, I would do A, extend it all the way over here, and all the way over here, and you would get a completely different look. So let's write the word inspire together, and you can trace the one that I've done here just to make it a little bit easier for you. We're going to go downstroke, underturn, stop, and we're aiming to connect at the midway point of the next letter. So I stopped about midway between this dashed line and the baseline here. We'll go down, overturn, and now I'm using the exit stroke of the N to become the first stroke of the S. And now I'm going to connect horizontally to the middle of the P. And if at this point you're like, okay, this is not as relaxing as I thought it would be, trust me, when you're first learning, it does kind of feel like you're learning an entirely new language, but I promise when it all comes together, it's so worth it. So our last project here, I have two kind of projects to leave you with, but I want us to do one together. So our last project here, I have two kind of projects to leave you with, but I want us to do one together using the full alphabet page of your workbook, or you can just look at the screen because you can see my alphabet here. Find the first letter of your last name. So my last name is DeSantis, so I'm going to find the D. I want you to identify which strokes you see in the first letter of your last name. So I see a downstroke, kind of this oval shape, downstroke, and a flourish at the end. I'm going to aim for center here and do my downstroke, overturn, downstroke, flourish. I would love to know what some of your key takeaways have been, and that way we can keep integrating those into our classes. For those that have to hop off, thank you for taking the time to spend, the last hour with me, and it's been such a pleasure. So really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, and I will see you for part 2 next month. Thank you.